All right, cool. We're on air. Um, Welcome, you guys. Looks like we got one new face, Robert. Welcome to our chat. We try to do these things weekly, but been kind of hectic past couple weeks. It's been about 2 weeks since we've done. So. All right, well, welcome to the new guy. All right, Mike's you're on here. Marco, thanks for joining us. Just kind of wanted to, since John's back. Based on what we were talking about, I wanted to kind of go over what we were talking about 2 weeks ago, and this is kind of going to relate to the conversation we were just having off air. Um, the plan for what we were doing, I think, is sound. I think the I don't want to say we forked WordPress, but we definitely have a repo of WordPress which is coming from the subversioning, and it's the development branch that I think has all of the tests in it as well. And our kind of methods that we wanted to take moving forward was to create modules from that repo and watch that repo basically become smaller. So as you create a module in your own fork, we bring that module into a separate repo, and then the core repo, which was originally brought in from that SVN, is now that many lines of code smaller. Um, Originally, we were debating whether or not to start from scratch, rewrite code, and do this whole thing. I feel like after a few more conversations, especially a couple weeks ago, we I think it's better that we create modules with existing code. So create a wrapper, put all the existing core code into it, so you have this nice module that is already core code. And that way, once we get to a point that all the core code is modular and in modules, then we can go ahead and start rewriting some of them, right? Because once you have all these modules separated out and completely decoupled from one another, it makes it really easy to rewrite one, to create new tests for each one, and do a lot more, better coding practices, et cetera, and then create new modules altogether. Throw out what core has done, bring in a brand new template engine, theme engine, brand new API for routing, and et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden you have this really modular thing that doesn't need to live only in the WordPress realm. You can now bring in other realms of PHP and other web areas and code with them as well, which I think is pretty cool. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want. That's kind of what we talked about 2 weeks ago. I think that's still the plan. I think that's the right way to go. Um, I don't know if anyone has any dissent on that right now, but 2 weeks ago I asked Mike and Jacob to create a template for modules.
Awesome.
They both submitted GIFs into our BackPress chat, and honestly, I liked both of them. Andreas also, I think, submitted a version of Mike's, which he changed up a little bit, and I don't know, they're all pretty good. Um, from my first glance at Mike's, I tend to lean towards his version a little bit more. Um, and so I think that's what we needed. That's our agenda item for this meeting. Is just let's just look at them one more time. Let's figure out which one everyone likes the best, and then start volunteering what you want to work on, and let's just start building something. Because I think we've talked about this almost over a month now. I think we've been talking, and it's time to start doing something. Um, First of all, I want to thank Mike and Jacob for doing that. That was awesome. Thanks for doing a little bit of help, a little bit of work, kind of pushing forward with just something to look at. Um, Thanks, Andreas. Andreas linked to Mike's, at least in the chat. So I don't know. I guess the best way is to just take a look at it. For anyone that is watching right now, I think we have like 3 viewers. If you're not in the BackPress channel, feel free to ping me on Twitter, and then you can get on there and then everything is shared there. Um, I did have a quick question though. So I'm looking at Mike's, and I was looking at Jacob's earlier, and we were talking about a long time ago when we had a conversation about how we're going to build this thing. We talked about inheritance, right? I'm just going to try not talking out of my. Um, no, we're talking about interfaces. Sorry. Um, I was curious why we're not using that, or why those weren't used. So, Mike, do you have any reason for why we shouldn't be using interfaces as far as the class structure goes?
So I guess just to clarify what you're asking to make sure that I understand. So essentially looking at the example that I put forth, I'm not using interfaces, and you're wondering why I didn't go down that route. Correct? I guess I didn't really rephrase it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking. I wanted to know, because we talked about it before, so I was just curious why you decided not to use them.
I've come to the conclusion, so I've been programming since '87, professionally in one form or another, and what I've found over that time is that there's lots of things that people that become like conventional wisdom, and yet I found a whole bunch of things over time that the conventional wisdom goes out of favor, and then people now do things differently. So that I think that conventional wisdom right now is that you should use interfaces. Looking at all the different things, I think interfaces are actually harmful. And I was thinking about writing a blog post with the incendiary title, PHP interfaces considered harmful. Let me try to put it in a nutshell very quickly. So how many of you, you're familiar with the args pattern in WordPress, right? Where you use, where instead of having 5, 6, 7 parameters on a function, you have the things that you're always going to need as parameters, so like register post type, where you have the post type, and then you have anything else that you may or may not provide in an array. I find that pattern being incredibly valuable for building software that over time evolves and can be made backward compatible and not break things. And that's especially important when you've got an ecosystem like WordPress where people go and build plugins, and you want to add a new version, you want to add a new parameter to a function. You don't want to break what they had before. Now, of course, you could just add it to the end, but then you could end up with functions with 10, 12, 15 parameters, and many times where you have to pass null in for 7 or 8 of them, right? Now, let's compare that to interfaces. And of course, I'm not comparing them as using one or the other. I'm trying to talk about the positive aspects of args and compare that to how interfaces make for a very fragile system over time. If we create an interface, and I'm going to use the ubiquitous example of stack, and you go, oh, I need an interface for a stack, and I'm going to do a push and a pop. So you put that in place, people start working with it in their plugins or their modules, and then later you come and go, oh, wait a minute, I really need to also add a top. And so then if you change that, if you add the top in, now you've broken everything that used the old ones, so now you have to create a new interface. So maybe it's called the top stack, and now later you realize you need to have a reverse, and so now it's called the reverse top stack. And you get this explosion of interfaces that people have to keep track of, and incompatibilities between older interfaces and new interfaces. And so if PHP had optional methods in interfaces, I would be supportive of them. But interfaces cannot evolve over time, so I am adamantly opposed to using interfaces.
I think that's a valid point.
I think Mike is right. I think I can imagine some use cases of things in a current iteration of WordPress where an interface might make sense, like a base database interface, where the things that you need to connect to a database are fairly universal. You need a server, a username, a password, a port, maybe some sockets or SSH type connections, but for the most part, that stays the same across pretty much everything. So you could have a base interface for a database that a class like WordPress's WPDB would implement. But yes, I agree for most other things that are not nearly as static as interacting with a database would be, that interfaces would you basically give up flexibility entirely by having an interface.
I'm going to jump in, and you're supporting my position, so I appreciate it. I'm going to further extend. I would even say that databases are not a good example because, over time we get NoSQL databases, we get graph databases, and things may change in how they interface. I think the point you were trying to make was that it was a well-known thing that is not likely to change. And that's where an interface, if you can pretty much look at it and go, the physics of the situation, and I'm using physics as a euphemism, but the physics of the situation are that it can't change. So therefore, okay, it might make sense for an interface. But if there's any chance of change of the requirements, I think interfaces cause problems with ability to evolve code.
Yeah, I agree. I think the database is sort of a dirty example because I can't think of anything that's changed in connecting to a database in a really, really long time. I would say like methods and all those kind of things do change clearly, but gosh, I can't think of any other lower level API in WordPress that hasn't somehow introduced a new variable or method or something that would have needed to have been inherited for a long time.
And
so
I mean
agree.
that goes back to if we need to change things and interfaces are going to be an issue for that, especially because we do want to keep backwards compatibility, and as we build this thing, WordPress is definitely going to change, so we're going to want to kind of try to keep up. So, all right, I mean that's a fair point. It was just a conversation we had early on. I think that was a good. Does anyone feel like we should be using interfaces? I mean, is there other side to this? Hey Jacob, I see you waving your hand. Feel free to just jump in. You can't talk right now.
Just for those who haven't heard, there's the, Google and read about structural typing. That's kind of an alternate to working with interfaces. It's not nearly as clean as the people who would like to use interfaces might. But in the context of WordPress and PHP, structural typing is simply using method exists and property exists before you access them.
Okay.
Or let me rephrase that. Using method exists and property exists to determine that an object has what you need rather than looking to see if it is of a certain type or if it implements a certain interface.
Okay, so let's say we move forward without using interfaces for now.
Can I ask Jacob a question before we move too far forward?
Yeah.
Jacob, since I know you can't talk, with a nod or a shake of the head, the link to your gist of the event storage interface.php, does that work? Or is that just sort of conceptual? Does it work? Yes or no? Okay.
No.
That's too bad. I mean, I didn't really look at it. I was kind of just looking at it and thought, actions and filters are fairly static in how they work, and they've been architected, and I couldn't imagine really adding a whole lot more to them. But
I would concur that would be a better example than the database.
Yeah.
Because it's more like the physics of the programming, right?
Exactly.
The way it
Right.
works. Um,
Looking at that, it seemed fairly straightforward, right? Like looking at uh, the definition of methods and then wrapping those in the current WordPress functions and gutting them and instead having them trigger back to the interface. That seems sound to me. That seems like exactly what you would want to use an interface for, which is, I think, like for all the reasons that there are not to use interfaces, there will every once in a while be something like this one where you're like, oh, yeah, I guess we could do that. But to Mike's point, if we use an interface for it, it makes it more difficult to not use an interface later. So it was neat to see that. I think Jacob's contribution there was pretty sound. I think that was a good. I think that was. Uh, it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat to see it look like this because I think if you've become intimate with WordPress's actions and filters and events, that you've probably. I feel like I've sort of imagined it working and looking like this anyways. So it's neat to see it translated this way. Well, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like Jacob's method because it's easy to see, right? Because it's like you see
Right.
do action, you can actually see a WordPress function as it iterates into like a a class that we have this module around.
Well, and then the event registry. In theory, you could have several registered event stacks. You sort of have this. You have one event registry function that has its own encapsulated static setup for event storage, but you could, in theory, every plugin could have its own stack instead of having everything commingled together. Having there be non-global registered stacks of plugins and filters that do not collide with each other is kind of awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a pretty sweet use case for that, I think.
So we've got to pause. I'm going to grab this pause for just a second and just say something real quick that we could either talk about or table and talk about other things. But just quickly, as in order to achieve what Roy asked for, which was to provide an example, it took me a while to figure out what exactly I should provide, and what I ended up doing was forking WordPress onto GitHub and then just trying to do refactoring and do as few changes as possible. So what I'm seeing one potential path for this activity to take, and I was quite surprised at how easy it was, is that for a period of time we don't try to add anything new. We simply refactor to extract modules out. And that's what you started with, Roy, which we talked about before. But I wanted to emphasize it as something that it was. I had an eerie feeling while I was doing, a very calming and cathartic feeling.
For sure.
Because I was able to actually touch things that somebody else might use at some point in the future that I never could touch before.
Right.
I guess that's a complete side from my point, but it was nice to be able to go in and say, I'm not trying to recreate it. I'm not trying to, re-architect it. I'm just trying to modularize it, period. And make the modularization of it and the approaches to it using as simple a code as I could, so that somebody could look at the code that was used, if they can carve it out from the rest of the code easily, and see it in the proper context, that it's really easy.
It is super easy. I would agree.
To do the approach that I took, which is basically, is it a core is this core module loaded? If so, then do something using the module, which was the code that used to be there.
So in your example. So I'm looking at.
We share code in this thing. I've never used Hangout code.
Not
Uh,
not
I can
exactly.
share.
At least you
I can.
couldn't before. We can share
I
links
can,
and gists and stuff.
I can share my screen. I guess I could just do that, right?
Great if I could see what you're pointing at.
Yeah, I guess that'd be good. All right, so you guys can all see my screen.
Yep.
All right, so looking at your code here, why don't you just walk us through it? What is test modular MU plugin like? What is the would you?
So it
What
would
is it?
be easier if you could go click the link that I posted in Slack to or go to the branch and then let's drill down into the code because seeing it in this in that format is much harder to process. Change the branch. So 1 and 2 are the issues. Okay, so
Oh, this is a whole WordPress. Like this is like you took core and all right, I see.
this is what I was suggesting we did before as a group. So I figured I would just show what I was talking about. So originally I took MU plugins, and that was the only thing that I made modular. And then I really liked what Andreas did, and I grabbed his the work he did on the comments, post types, and taxonomies, and pulled that in. So probably, but this isn't the best place to start. If you
Do you want to share your screen if that would make things easier instead of you?
Um,
If not, it's fine.
no, it'd be because I don't know how to do it, and I don't want to cause.
Okay. So just tell me where you want me to click to, and
So back up to let's see, back up one more, and let's go into includes. Oh, I'm sorry, back up, and then go into settings. Now, this is the good starting point. So I'm going to look for the first line. Go to 100.
Load modules.
Yeah. So I added some functionality into WP class that it's essentially the call static. This is a style I like to use. It's not critical to what we're doing here, but it's just I chose to go ahead and do it that way. So load modules is implemented in its own class, but load modules goes into the subdirectory and pulls anything that's in WP modules out. It's very rigid. In other words, it's unlike plugins. You have to use the same name for your entry point file as you do for your directory, and et cetera, et cetera. So it can be very fast. It uses a directory scan, but that could be replaced either with persistent cache and/or preloading it with a build process. I went through a period where, in working with a similar library, WPLib, where I was hard coding the modules, and that ended up getting to be a real nightmare. So I decided not to hard code the modules, at least not during development. So that's one place where I load modules, and I chose go up a few lines above to 94, and that basically, there's a whole bunch of decisions I had to make just to move forward. So most of the decisions in here I'm not specific to exactly how it's done, but this was one way to do it. So that's a file, a drop-in that you could add a hook in that would get rid of core modules.
Okay.
Or not, or add modules, or do whatever. But I'm also making the distinction between core modules and what I'm calling user modules, and the possibility in the future of theme modules and plugin modules.
Okay. I think we can talk about that kind of stuff later, but that's a good start.
If you could go down to 186. This is the basic pattern. that might be the best way to do it, or something else. But I take the code that I'm trying to modularize and pull it into a class that's for pull it into the MU plugins module, and then create a method for it so that I can call it here between lines 186 and 190. And then similarly, 206 through 216.
But then we have to create one of these, is core module for, I guess they're core modules. That's not a huge problem, but I see this being an issue. Like if you have a whole bunch of modules, I don't want to have a different settings file necessarily for, like if we can have one settings file that's just universal, right? That'd be much better than having.
Not sure what you mean by a settings file.
Like literally this file that we're looking at, right? You have to have, these lines of code, or else, both post types, the post types module you created won't get used or won't get created.
So part of the philosophy of the approach that I took is that I want to make incrementally tiny changes, right? So I want to basically extract everything related to post types, and I want to put that into a module. And then I want to be able to turn that module off and test that everything still works in WordPress except for the things that mean post types, that nothing breaks, for example. And this is mostly a copy of what Andreas did, and I noticed that when I did this, then the media module broke. So if you go into media in the admin, it crashes, which tells me that maybe instead of post types, it needs to be blog posts, post type equals post type equals page, and so forth. So there will be a whole bunch of iteration where we do this, we go, oh, that's not modular enough, or that's not atomic enough, and then you break it out, and then you come back later and you go, everything's passing the unit tests. Now we're going to re-architect this part. Now that the settings file, instead of being however many lines it is, 500, 1,000, 300, is now 20 lines. Now we can re-architect it. But I want to do, or my approach was to take and make as tiny changes as we go through it, so that we can maintain compatibility during the process, which is the approach that I was advocating for before.
Okay, I mean, I think it's a good start. I think we might have to look at it again once we start adding a whole bunch of modules, but I think this is clear enough for now that we can see easily what you're taking out and what you're putting in and how it's loaded. I think it's a good start. So,
Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
I should probably explain where is core module is.
Well, yeah. So that's my next. That was what I was going to say next. Let's take the next
Scroll
step.
at the top. So we can go up one level to www, and now we want to go into includes, and we need to search for. There's two files I want to show you. I'm not sure which to show you first. Let's show you. Actually, load class wp.php.
Which file is it? Sorry.
Class-wp. It's a WordPress file that I modified. Now go down to line 631. So these are two methods that I added. One's called register helper, and then the other is call static. So you essentially, without diving into the helper and how it works, because it's pretty straightforward, but you can say this class will help the WP class, and all that means is it will respond to static call requests. And that way you can have one entry point. I like to think of them as when I do it for WP Lib, I like to think of it as that's my global function namespace, without having to resort to just prefix names. But the benefit of this, if we added it to WordPress, there's probably some downsides, but the benefit to adding to WordPress is that we could actually create a new WordPress API to replace all the functions or to supersede the functions that might actually be consistent, as opposed to the inconsistent functions that have evolved over many years by many different people. But that's another subject. I just wanted you to see how this works, so that you're not confused by how it works.
Okay.
Now you can back out and go into class-wp-modules plural. All right, so this is onload registers this class as a helper itself. So this is how isCoreModules ends up being able to be used with WP. isCoreModules is on line 32.
Yeah.
And if you'll scroll down, you'll see, I believe, the is module, which is a more generic one, get modules, and I think in there we have register module.
So this acts like a factory. So every new module comes to this, so it knows all the modules that exist.
Yeah, pretty much. And at the very bottom there's scan modules, which does the directory scan. But Andreas objected to that, but I basically said that's a quick and dirty way to do it. It's great for development as you're changing files, but we could move to a build process that does the same thing but does it once and generates the code, and or we could simply do that once and load it into persistent cache, and then if you're on persistent cache, then you don't have to do it until you reboot the server or clear the cache. I also made the distinction between core modules and user modules. And what I've been doing, I've mentioned, some people may be familiar, I've got a library we've been working with trying to make it easier to do custom site development for agencies called WP Lib, also GitHub. And I've been doing a lot of work with that to create modules that are outside of WordPress, right? In doing this work, I realized modules that are equivalent to, say, plugins, i.e. that third parties create them, they're going to have a slightly different set of requirements than modules that are core modules. And so what you see here is primarily core modules.
I think that there's going to be a good distinction between core modules and everything else. I'm not sure. User modules kind of, like when you say user modules, I immediately assume.
It's not clear what I mean, so I was being convenient because I didn't want to spend 3 times as much time on this trying to perfect the wording, etc. But for user module, I simply meant that they would be loaded from the WP content directory. So
basically taking the modules that you have or that you're thinking about, core modules are everything that WordPress needs to be WordPress.
Yes.
And then user modules are everything else.
Well, correct. And then there's 2 more types of modules that are the types of modules I'm using in WP Lib. So there are theme modules and then there are plugin modules. And the only real distinction between the two is that they are packaged with the theme or packaged with the plugin versus added by the user for the site. And when I say user, I mean the person who is installing and configuring the site, not the end user.
Okay.
Composer would assemble the user modules in the model that you've been talking about, where this WordPress reimagined would be optimized to work with Composer, at least somewhat.
Okay. So why don't we step through and into a module? So what's the best module to look at?
So back up. An easy module to look at is post types.
This is what Andreas is working with you on?
So I took what he did because he changed some of the approaches that I took. So I took the code that he pulled out and I reapplied it to my approach. The change, kind of like what he had was instead of an onload at the top, he had a run, which did effectively similar things. I've been using this approach, static on load, for a really long time, and you'll notice at the very bottom, it does on load. I know some people always want to add those into filters so they can be unhooked, but the key point of that is that it's the only thing it should be doing is like adding filters or doing something that can be reversed. So I don't want people to look at that and go, oh, wait a minute, we should be doing that differently, and then get distracted and not look at the others. I added on register, which might be creating too much complexity, and that's simply because on the static on load, it registers the helper, but I don't have an instance. I only have the class name. But inside register helper, it actually creates an instance, and that's where the onRegister gets called. It's possible that we could move to doing it like Andreas did, but the reason I didn't like that was because he didn't actually run those until the modules were all put together, and then he ran through and created them, which did it later in the page load. And in working with WP-lib, the thing that I've run into spending more time than anything else is trying to bootstrap things and get them to operate in the right order.
Yeah, no, it can be a pain. So
that's why I kind of gravitated towards the static on load, so that I could run code at the beginning. And then the onRegister is there so that I could have access to instances to be able to do to add hooks. Then line 97.
So you call the onRegister.
It's called
okay, so
it's called inside of register helper.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm trying to say, that was a long-winded way of explaining it, but let me summarize by saying that aspect of it is up for discussion and debate and come up with what's the simplest and easiest. I was just giving you some of the reasons why I chose the path that I chose, which differed from what Andreas did.
Okay.
And then there are two functions in here. I'm going to describe how they're currently implemented, and then I'll back up and describe how I think they need to evolve. The first function is the menu. I think it's add post types.
Yeah.
And that is literally called in place of where that code used to be. And it was in menu.php. I think it was in the wp-admin/include/menu.php. And that's the only thing you need to know is that function or that method is called where that code used to be.
Okay, so you just took the code from there and brought it here.
Yep, and then scrolling down, create initial post types. That is the code that was elsewhere, and where it was called, I simply called this code instead. This method instead. Didn't make any changes in the code itself. It's just wrapped and called from a different place. Now, after doing this, and then going and turning them off so that the post types module was not in use, I surfed around the admin and there were a bunch of things that were broken. And
Well, yeah.
I dove into the code and started looking. So to create a post types module, this thing is probably going to be literally 20 times the size it currently is. Or maybe, I shouldn't say 20 times the size. What I think we need to end up doing is we need to modularize it more than post types, plural. I think we need a module for posts, which are the blog posts, a module for pages, a module for media, and so on and so forth. And then part of our decision-making process through this project will be determining which pieces of code go into which module.
Wouldn't you run it? Wouldn't it be better to run it? I know JSON REST API. What they do is they have the core module, and then their posts and pages, etc. Endpoints for the API are just essentially extension, like they're classes that extend that core class. So wouldn't it be better to create a core module which handles any post type, and that be the default, and then we can create, if you want, modules, but they're really just extending out the core module for a post, and then that's when you can have more of the code for posts, and then another one for media, et cetera, et cetera.
So 6 to 1, half a dozen the other. I think that we could have a post types module, and we could have a post type equals post module, right? And then the post type equals post module would depend upon the post types module. Now, that would add complexity, which we may or may not want to add at least through the first iteration of this process. I'm on the fence as to whether that would be good or not, but I think I'm leaning towards anything that makes it really simple as opposed to overly complicated. And I also don't think that we can really do what they did, because you got to remember, they took a clean room design, right? They started building the API without having to worry about the existing architecture. So they were able to create base classes and then inherit from them. I don't know that we're going to be able to model the current functionality into an inheritance hierarchy. I even wonder if
not. I think we're agreeing. So the post, let's say the posts module is really just the post type module extended, not necessarily as a inheritance or interface or anything, but you could include the post type. Sorry, you could include the create post, this module, let's say the core module by itself, without necessarily creating or using the posts module. So you can have the accessibility to create new post types without necessarily having posts as a post type if you don't need it.
Right, but let me say the following, which I think I'm going to, and nobody in particular, but just the process that we've had thus far, I'm going to, a slight bit of constructive criticism. I think a lot of what we've done is we've talked about things in abstract instead of going in and just started doing things. Like, this was very helpful that you kind of forced me to do this. You were saying, I need an example. So it forced me, and I spent a good 8 hours on it. And many thoughts that I had, I changed my mind on because I realized as I was doing the coding that actually the code that exists will support a different idea better. So discussing whether we have post types and post and so forth, I think it's going to be more as we refactor. Hopefully that will kind of fall out into our lap. You know, it'll make itself apparent what it needs to be.
Okay, but you're saying for now, take what you've done. Let's say we start with this. Strip out the create initial post types, or If we keep it in there, it would actually call on other modules which are kind of separated out. So we have another module just for posts, another module just for media, another module just for pages, etc.
Right. So if my very next step, if that were where I was going to focus, I would literally create a module called post, or post plural probably, and then I would extract this register post type out, put it over there, call it register post type post as the method name, and then in place I would call, say, WP colon register post type post, and slowly refactor in that manner so that at any point I make a small change, I can reload the page and WordPress still works.
Okay. Another question I had. So I see that you have register post type. Is Do you think that's the right level to be attacking it, or should we be going up a level? Should we be refactoring or modularizing the code that it calls? Because right now, that's where we're saying, okay, the line at where we're creating modules is at a function level. Should we be going up a level? Should we be going one level deeper and saying, well, maybe the code that registered post type calls should be, refactored into modules as well?
This goes back to the philosophy that I've taken and I'm trying to advocate, which is that rather than try to rethink how something is done too much, we make the smallest change we can make. At each point along the way, we commit that code, and then we continue. So we might go through an evolution of 3 or 4 different refactors to get to the end point. But by doing it this way, we actually have something that maintains compatibility with existing WordPress, with one important caveat that nobody's talked about, but I want to make here in a second.
Okay. I think you said Ryan's favorite word, which is refactoring. Ryan loves refactoring.
So the important caveat is that as we do this, right, we make it. If we do the approach I'm advocating, which is to go 100% backward compatible, and we're seeing all your stuff here. I don't know if you're consciously.
Yeah.
And as we do that, we're going to find many plugins and themes are going to break because they are designed to assume that things are always in WordPress, and they're not going to have any code to protect for making sure that the modules are actually there.
But that all comes down to the whole dependency thing for plugins and themes. And if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I didn't see any green bars moving, so. But the dependency from plugins to modules is a whole other issue, I think. But the whole choosing what to extract. How I went about it, I just looked at the admin, and then I saw the links to the left, and then I don't want to have posts and pages. So I just extracted them or moved code that registered posts and pages, and then saw what happened, and then I saw, oh, yes, I need to change things in the posts menu and so forth. So I think the top-down approach or something, nothing as high level as possible, I think we should move things out. Not look at the register post type code or any such things. Try to find what you call it, the module within WordPress, because some things are coupled, but they are not too coupled, like the posts and the menus for the posts.
So you don't think attacking register post type is necessarily the...
Yes, but I'm supporting what Mike did, since that's what I did. But going below register post type and looking at that functionality that is pointless, I think, at this stage. Trying to look, we have the register post types, then we identify what the post type affects and the attachments affect. Like Mike said, if you don't have the attachment post type, then the media library you can upload and so forth, but you can't change the data belonging to a image that you have uploaded unless the post type attachment is registered. So identifying these pieces and then making each piece a separate module, because attachments don't seem to need posts or pages, so attachments, or what you call it, the media itself would be a module. So I'm just agreeing with Mike.
So
I think I'm agreeing with Mike.
I want to jump in and say I was really excited to see what you did, Andreas, because I pulled out MU plugins because I thought that was the easiest thing to pull out, and I wasn't even going to try to tackle things that you tackled. And when I saw that you tackled them, it was like, oh, maybe this is easier than I thought it was going to be.
It was really easy. I just removed the parts and then I reloaded the page, and then I saw an error log for the various parts. I didn't test thoroughly, so I didn't know that media library broke because I moved the attachments. But the approach was pretty easy for those parts. Then there is issues with other things like tax queries and so forth. The whole WP query and the WP tax query. I started there and tried to extract everything relating to taxonomies, but that was a fool's errand. So I simplified and just went for the post types directly. Because taxonomy seems to be very integrated themselves, it seems. The whole idea of taxonomy, since they are hard-coded into the WP query and the WP tax query functionality.
Okay. All right. I kind of want to move forward. So I kind of like it. I think that based on what you've done, I know Jacob. I know yours is really good too. But I like the approach that Mike has taken. I think it's going to be a good starting point for us, and everything's kind of already kind of put together in a way a little bit. And you can kind of go basically you can start with something, right? So you can create a module and kind of start doing something with it. And then you can actually start testing if your module works in an environment. I guess, Mike, the only thing I would request from you at this point is just if you haven't documented like a quick, here's how you create a new module, that would be helpful for anyone who wants to start getting involved. All right, first go to the settings, or whatever. First do this, then do this. Just a quick high-level, layman terms, 1, 2, 3, steps, so they can go from nothing, essentially, forking and
You're asking me to do that thing it's always the last thing that I end up doing.
yeah. When it should be
all the other documentation I haven't done yet that I need to do, but yeah, okay.
Yes, and it should be one of the first things. In fact, I would argue that documenting should almost be done first before you even start coding, because then you know what you need to code. But I know that's never ever the case. It's always you code first, and I'm horrible with documenting myself. But
No, I was making a joke.
Yeah, I know. So with our collaborative environment, I just think it'd just be better. So it doesn't have to be super in detail. It just needs to be. Honestly, I've already lost. So if you can do it, then I can actually start helping.
I completely concur. It makes sense. I'm just teasing.
Yeah. I'm not sure if maybe we need to bring your settings file into the main repo, into our repo, because it seems like it might be useful to have there. So I'm not sure if this is. I'm not sure if we want to fork it and then bring in all these changes and then make that the new core, or and.
Can I ask some questions? I was kind of lurking, and I know you muted me because I was rearranging some monitors and stuff. But so I was lurking and listening, and I agree with everything so far. I have questions. Is now a good time for questions?
Yeah, fair enough. How long is any?
One of the things that one of the lessons, I guess, that I would say that I've learned with BuddyPress and BBPress, and one of the sort of, like, I would say undocumented paradigms that we've tried to stick with for method names and those kind of things are like in the classes, which are I'm sort of imagining something like BBPress as a module, right? If we're calling post types a module, we're calling taxonomies a module. Even though BBPress is a plugin and it might be composed of several modules, the nice thing, or the way that we've built it, is that a lot of the method names purposefully overlap with actions or hooks or filters that are already in WordPress core. So you can look at a method called init and know that it is being initialized on the init action in WordPress. And that's created something easy for the teams that work on BuddyPress and BBPress to follow, because you no longer really need to think about what, for example, like the if it's on load or on register or on this or on that, when those things are being executed, like when those methods are firing, and maybe it's a question for Mike, or maybe this is also a question for everyone, do we want to standardize the modules that either we're building or bringing in or refactoring to follow a very strict set of execution points to make sure that methods or modules all are familiar, they all have a standard structure, they all have relatively similar method names? Are we inventing that paradigm currently? Mike, do you feel like what you've got here is right, or are we not that far in the conversation yet?
So I'm strongly in favor of having a much more rigid set of standards than WordPress itself has. The WP-lib stuff I did has a really, really elaborate set of conventions. I shouldn't say really. It's a small set of conventions, but they're there for the exact reasons that you're talking about. What you see here, some of it borrows from WP-lib, some of it is ad hoc because I was not trying to replace core functionality in WP-lib. So the names of the methods that I'm using to replace the code didn't really have any rhyme or reason for that yet. But if we can identify a pattern that they're following, I think it would be great if it could have a set of conventions.
And then in last week's meeting, or 2 weeks ago, which I had missed, I think, did we agree on what minimum PHP versions are? Are we using namespacing? Are we using use statements? Can a WordPress technically be its own namespace, and then plugins would theoretically need to define their own namespace? Modules would end up with their own namespaces. Do we care about how separated out that those things are? Does that give us the opportunity to theoretically have a base module that doesn't do anything but that other classes inherit, so that they may not need to duplicate functionality, like hooking into a init, hooking into mu plugins loaded, hooking into plugins loaded, hooking into the user, hooking into roles, everything else? Do we want to maybe imagine what a base module would look like, which almost sort of borders on the idea that we've tossed around for years? I think all of us have brought up the idea, or in a conversation, of like a base plugin class. And then from there, once we have a base, does that become our roadmap for how we modularize other parts of core? Or are the pieces of functionality that are in core so unique and explicit that they don't fit into any of those paradigms at all? Do we have thoughts on some of that stuff?
I have thoughts to put some of this together, so I'll quickly throw those out and let other people chime in. The example that I prepared actually does have a base class. It's called WP module. And if you look at it, you'll notice that the only code that's in it is an opening and closing brace.
I saw that.
That's because there's nothing yet that has emerged. And so my point is that I think what we need to do is we need to go through the process of extracting this code, refactoring to extract the code out to create the modules. And I think a lot of the answers to the questions that you just asked will appear as we do it. And at least I don't think I have any clue what the answers are at this point because I haven't gone down that path.
I do think we need a standardized, first of all, and just go back to your question. I think standardized is going to be crucial to keeping all our modules and all future modules consistent, which could go back to our talk about whether we use interfaces or not, because if you use interfaces, you have to include methods, so at least we know everything will be standard. But let's just say, okay, so for right now, everything needs to be standardized. If we're going to take Mike's example, everything should have an onload, everything should have, on a register. And I think that we should definitely do that. As far as PHP version, we had a couple conversations about it. I think we kind of came to the compromise of 5.4 being the standard that we go with, because it offers us a good amount of features that 5.3 doesn't, but without being too, because of WordPress core being, I think 5.2, 5.3, it'll be a while. So I think 5.4 is definitely a good place to start. And that's what we talked about, goes back a few weeks. So I think that's what we should stick with. As far as namespacing, we haven't really gotten into a whole bunch of conversations about it. Personally, I think that everything should be namespaced and separated. So every module that isn't. So I think WordPress core module. So anything that dictates or anything that is WordPress today, whether it's a module or not, is WordPress namespace, and everything else isn't. So, and we should stick to that. So anything that's a module that's not part of the WordPress core functionality can be namespaced something else. And I'm not sure where that line is crossed. I'm not sure if WordPress core we're saying just database management and schema, and that's it. Maybe post types are even in their own namespace, like registering a post type. Or we say everything that is WordPress today, module or not, is in the WordPress namespace, and then as you create new modules then that are not WordPress, then they have to be namespaced something else.
That makes sense.
I think that might be something that can evolve a little bit. I'm not sure if we need to create a decision on that right now. Mike doesn't look like he's using namespaces in his example code, as far as I can see.
Yeah, no namespaces. And then
I'm actually not a fan of namespaces for use in WordPress. So I'm gonna fight for no interfaces, or at least not like have interfaces everywhere. I would prefer not to have namespaces for a whole bunch of reasons, but obviously I'm one vote.
It's funny because having worked with WordPress for so long that I haven't personally needed to use interfaces for a whole lot of stuff other than just seeing what they do and how they work and educating myself. I think because of the way that WordPress is coded, namespaces don't really provide plugins or themes a whole ton of value because you're not really you're not really namespacing it from anything because nothing else is really trying to fight you for that namespace very frequently. But if WordPress were different, or if it were reimagined, that we might have the opportunity to use namespaces for exactly the thing that they're intended to be used for.
And I think that we're creating a new we are re-envisioning WordPress to use better code standards and kind of bring more up to date with the PHP community, right? So
Right.
PHP has adopted namespace. All modern frameworks use namespace. I think that. I hate to be the person that says because everyone else does it, we should do it, because
Is it who?
that's how. Huh?
Is it who
Yes,
does?
everybody else.
Because everyone else uses it, we should use it, which is a horrible, horrible reason to do anything, because that's how I think Backbone is still alive. But I don't know. I think there's definitely some use case for it. There's definitely some good uses for it, and it does allow us to, create more separation, I guess, between the modules, right? Because everything has its own namespace, so you can kind of differentiate between things a lot easier and not have to worry about it. I don't know. I think that it's something that we can evolve into use through our first or second refactor, but
Can I quickly throw out something as a question, and that's I'm thinking that this process as we're going through refactoring would end up not being okay, somebody's refactored something, now we go to the world and say, start using this code with this refactor, but instead we're going to go through normal, this is the question if you agree, we're going to go through a whole bunch of different iterations of refactoring before we get to a release, right?
Oh, I believe so. I think so, for sure.
And so, for example, we could table the discussion of names. Obviously, that sounds self-interested since I don't want them, but we could table that. We could table that for a week or 2 weeks, a month, and it's not that hard to add them, right?
Sure.
Later.
We could. I think to Roy's point is the coming up with what we feel like are what we want the standards for this project to be. Help us avoid writing code that doesn't qualify. I agree. So I agree. Like the one thing that I think that Mike that you've done that is critically important to what it is that we're trying to do is just start experimenting. This is an educational experiment. You have to go in and start digging a hole to see what's down there, and you won't really know what you want to build until you know what the materials are that you're working with. And a lot of what's in WordPress has been not only obfuscated in layers and layers of weird abstraction over the course of 13 years, but we've also just culturally been warned not to go in there and go poking around. So to start going in and really purposefully tearing stuff apart is an educational exercise that is fun to do and at the same time yields a lot of knowledge that you don't have until you go in there. So I think there's a balance, and I think we'll end up meeting in the middle, right? Like we'll come up with what modern standards are. We'll see how how far and away those WordPress is from those standards, and then we'll work towards filling in those gaps as we go. But it's good to hear that we're all in agreement that what we want is to keep this as close to the PHP end of life cycle as we can without being too bleeding edge, PHP 7.0, don't know how the world's going to work anymore type approach. So it's good. I think this is good.
Well, I'll throw one marker there, and that is if we do go with namespaces, can we please go with WP instead of WordPress? I don't have to type that all the time.
I agree. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think we should use it. I think we should just say yes, we're going to use namespaces, and I think that I know that even in my realm, being in WordPress for so long, yeah, I haven't had any real use for namespace, but because I've been using WordPress primarily. I would say, like,
Right.
in the WordPress realm, you don't need to use namespaces that well. You can pretty much get away without it. But that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean,
So let me give you the one big reason why I really prefer not to use namespaces.
I'm curious to hear this.
So I've recently been working on a code generator for WP-lib, basically scaffolding tool, and actually there's two reasons why I don't want to use it. I've been working with a scaffolding.
There's two reasons. Each reason is a 4-part reason. Let's start with the first reason of the first 4-part reason.
Point taken, but so one of the things I did was build a library that's purely PHP, nothing WordPress, and so I figured I would go with PHP standards, not WordPress standards, right? So I did namespaces and did it all as best I could to follow that approach, and I found that I ran into an awful lot of situations where it was unclear how I needed to do things to get the namespaces to line up, and that just might be that after 3 months of working with it, I'd be fine. But it was confusing, especially when I wanted to check to see if a class was of a certain class, and so forth. And I know that's just, I guess, my comfort working with namespaces where I didn't enjoy working with them.
Right.
But the place where I have an issue with it is in theming, because being able to get your head around the PHP rules for namespaces, it's not straightforward and obvious for people, especially those who aren't programmers, who think of themselves as designers mostly. Mm-hmm. And if they have to figure out when they need to put a leading slash, when they don't, when they have to use a uses statement, and so forth, I think that will end up being problematic for the themers of the world. And so I guess if there could be a compromise, here would be my compromise. I would like to see an API, because I see Andreas in chat said core stuff really needs namespaces. I'd like to see a compromise that said that the way that we architect things, themes will never need to use namespaces. Themers will never need to use namespaces. They will never need to know about leading slashes and so forth. That's my take on it. And then if it's, you've got to, in order to do modules or to work on core, you have to know namespaces. Then I'm less concerned about it.
I think your point's valid. I think there is something that is very convenient about WordPress's template tags just being very procedural and simple. There's not a whole lot of dependency management you ever really need to worry about, because by then plugins have loaded, your functions.php is loaded, all of WordPress is loaded, everything is ready to go. You don't have to worry about trying to namespace individual portions of a theme outward. Of course, themes could theoretically implement their own if they really wanted to, but I don't know how much value that would really provide them. I would imagine that thanks to template-loader.php, if we chose to keep that the way that it is still, that the entire theme output would end up in the global namespace anyways, hopefully, and then we'd be okay. We'd end up with everything similar to the way that it is now, without needing to add namespaces into all of the template parts or the template files. But I guess that's down to implementation, right? So I think I agree. I think as long as we can keep it relatively simple, that's or equally as simple as it is now.
So let me give a specific example just so it's clear. If we modularize it, let's say we have /wp/post types /get post types, right? And I know that we already have a function for that, so we're not overriding it. Let's say we have something like that. We add a new method. Now, unless we add a function for that, or we add, like my helper approach to WP:, now themers are going to need to know the leading //WP/post type /whatever to get access to that functionality. That's I want to, the kind of way that I've seen in the development projects I've worked on you've got your back-end coders and your front-end coders. And your front-end coders probably don't often know PHP. They may cut and paste, but they don't often know it. And so I'd like to make that as simple as possible for them. That's the end of my sermon.
Can we do that though? That's the question. Can you have a namespaced backend for like post types without having a namespaced theme if you need some of that functionality?
Yes, if we use the helper module thing that I did, and we have the ability to like export that.
I don't want to. You're saying if we have this one thing, which means more code. So it's like, okay, in order to do this, we need to create more code. But you know, we're trying to pull away from that notion, right? Why create more code when you don't really need more code?
Actually, I think it can be done with in the call static. I mean, it's more code, but it's a small amount of generic code. So I think that's why I was saying, could we table this? Could we not like just move forward and do as
no.
the experimentation, start creating things, see how they look, see how they feel, and then sync up every week or every other week, and then go, oh, look what I did. And you guys could do the same thing that I did, which is do a proof of concept for some part of it that uses namespaces, and then present that.
Okay. So, Mike, why don't we, when we get off this, why don't we talk about in the Slack channel how to get your code with documentation, quick documentation, into the main repo, so people can start playing around.
I'd like to interject a little bit because we haven't discussed the approach I took really with the whole.
That's unacceptable. I'm just kidding.
But one thing I didn't want to do was add code to the core files. If you look at the repo I put up, there is no additional code except requiring of PHP files in the VP settings file. I didn't like the idea of adding more stuff. The whole thing annoyed me, so I wanted to see if there was an approach where you only extract code from WordPress without adding something in. I'm not sure with the whole create post types functions that seem to be run twice in the WP settings. John, do you know why they have both on calling register post types in settings?
Yes, I do. It's for two reasons. It's to load the. There are some like whatever the baseline internationalizations that need to be pulled in early, and then it's to maintain some sort of backwards compatibility with short init, and then the original query request, I think. For some reason, I have like a fuzzy memory of that.
Because I just removed it and everything worked. So
there is.
But that's still testing.
It has to do. There's two parts to it. There's the loading loading the core post types early, and then loading translations early. And I don't remember which one it is and why. I'd have to look again. There were three things, and so to answer your question, that code didn't exist until 3.0 when custom post types were put in. Originally, I think, if I remember correctly, the post types for posts and pages and attachments were originally loaded basically too early, and they get pulled in early, then because to support backwards compatibility, then they get reinitialized again after the locale is loaded, so that translations reapply, if I remember correctly. I
Then there's
think.
this question of which version of WordPress does the create calls actually? What plugins are needed, or whatever it's
Right.
called? It seems so odd to have it called twice. That's what.
I think most of that is to support backwards compatibility, and then the installation process of WordPress itself, and then loading translations early, and then reinitializing strings after a locale has been changed or loaded in. Because there's a whole other problem with internationalization in WordPress. Not to go too far into the tangent, but I think the whole problem stems from translations are loaded too late, and the current user is loaded too late because you have to reinitialize all of the get text when a user has picked their own language that is different than the environment language that WordPress has. So it loads it up, it loads in whatever the default locale is, then init fires, and then the current user in a multi-site install can pick their own language, and now it has to reinitialize their localizations. And because post types were loaded too early before, because localizations and the user was loaded too late always, it's mostly a stub, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay, because it just looks so odd.
It is super odd. I think if I think back to WordPress 3.0 and when custom post types and the multi-site merge went in, that Andy may have actually been in my apartment in Rhode Island when he wrote that code when we were talking about it, but I don't remember why exactly that happened. So I can always ask him why that needed to happen.
Okay.
Andreas, if I understood your code correctly, it looked like as you extracted things out of core, you called them on hooks. Did I understand that correctly?
The register post types, yes, they were called on init.
No, well. Let's take the menus.
Yeah.
So rather than
They were called on the private hook admin menu. There is a hook that is underscore admin menu that is called before the ordinary admin menu.
So I was concerned about that approach because, and I think James talking about the complexities of why create initial post types and taxonomies are called twice underscores the problem, and that being that everything is so tightly intertwined for when exactly it needs to run so that it doesn't conflict with something else, or that plugins that were written that assume things are loaded in a certain order are not broken. I think that we have to add things into core to call things at the exact point. Otherwise, we're going to have, my belief is, we're going to have this nightmare of things not running in the right order.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of little nuances that we're going to run into. I agree.
But I think we should just try to not, as much as possible, not add stuff, and just try to detect if it breaks. If something is detected to break, then we fix the breakage. Otherwise, we just add stuff and don't know why.
Right. I agree.
Well, when you say adds, are you trying to say that the pattern where I say if this module is loaded called something, that we shouldn't add that code in?
Yes, try to avoid that. One thing that struck me when I was looking at core was that it's really odd about it not really using itself.
I know. That's exactly the problem that I think what we're doing should hopefully solve.
Yes, because the whole admins thing, the whole core admin menu, that's built by manipulating the global menu directly instead of using the functions for adding menus.
So, in
So
terms,
it's really. I don't. Then if changing that, then we goes into the whole changing the core code to suit our purposes. But it's really strange when you look at the core code, and you know that you can use core code to do the exact same thing, but then like you said, the whole dependency thing and call order things come into place. So you don't really know, but I just want to add as little as possible. That's just what I would say. Add as little as possible.
my thought on that, just to make it abundantly clear, is that on the surface, not adding stuff to core sounds like a better approach because it's a simpler approach, right? But compatibility, in my mind, means not only compatibility with WordPress, but compatibility with as much of the ecosystem as possible, including all the plugins and themes that are written for it. And when you say, well, just try it and see if it works, well, how are we going to try it and see if it works with 50,000 plugins? The best way to do that, in my mind, is to make as few changes as possible. So, in other words, if we pull code out, call a function at that exact same point to call the same code so that we can be almost positive that it's behaving exactly the same. And then once we get traction down the road, it's possible that we could have much better test suites, and we could have people who are pledging to have their plugins support our plugins, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's far too early to end up not calling code at the exact same place that it was previously called. That's my 2 cents. If everybody overrides it, then I'll back up. But that's my concern.
I'm not really sure that there are many places that code needs to be added. Looking around, this was just the obvious place because here we see a direct call. But I'm not sure that when I looked around in the code base, I'm not sure that that was the case.
I think the extra code that we're going to have to write, and I think what Mike has started writing, is the code that's necessary to start abstracting pieces out, and then that's it. So I think, like, theoretically, we will need to write a little bit of scaffolding code that might duplicate what wp-load.php looks like, that might duplicate what wp-settings.php looks like, and then what we'll do is just systematically gut each include or each require and start modularizing each one of those. It's not really like it's more code, it's the necessary scaffolding to allow this modularity or this decoupling to occur. I agree 100% that what we're not doing, at least at this stage, is rewriting WP rewrite or rewriting WP roles or adding new methods to WPDB. All that we're doing is just writing that fuzzy abstraction layer in the middle that just says, okay, well, the only way to see if this works is to intercept this stuff in core that we can't otherwise intercept and make it look over here instead. And you can't do that yet in WordPress without hacking core and praying for rain a little bit. So I agree 100%. What we don't want to do is introduce new modules or write a bunch of new code. I think we still have to write a little bit of that stubby functionality to make WordPress core talk to what we're trying to decouple, though.
Can you add that I had to write a core compatibility file for my extraction of MU plugins because WP-MU get is called somewhere.
Yep.
But I felt it was pointless to have it still in the code base when it's in a module, so then you have to add a compatible
I think
function to keep it running.
Yeah, I think I think eventually what we'll come down to is like the core of whatever this is will be basically actions and filters and a bunch of execution points, and all of our modules will just they'll get included and hooked in, and call it a day, kind of.
So along those lines, if we take the menu where you use the existing action to call the code that was previously there, but you called it in a different order than the code that was previously there. So the way that I'm envisioning is we would replace code that's in core with stubs to call out to modules, and then for the particular case of the admin menu, once we've refactored all of the things that are adding to modules, we might see that it's condensed down to something where there are no real side effects, and we could replace all the code that we added to call the stubs to just call either an existing hook or a new hook, and then it ends up being what you're looking for. But the path that I'm suggesting is that we go on the much lower risk path of making tiny incremental changes so that we're less likely to break things along the way. Because if let's say that we do write some code and we go for several months and we've made a whole bunch of changes, and then we realize that we broke a whole bunch, 40% of the code base out there, it's going to be hard to unravel it because we've got a bunch of other code we wanted to change, but now we've got things that depend upon those changes. You see where I'm going?
And in my imagination, we don't touch anything in the WP admin directory at all, ever. WP admin is like our litmus test. It's what says the code that we have decoupled and remodularized passes. If WP admin still works without us doing anything to it, there's our integration test right there. WP admin is WordPress, right? Like, if our decoupleization and abstraction and modularization still allows for WP admin to function exactly the same way as it always has, we win.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Andreas refactor actually was specifically targeted at the admin.
That's the failure point. That's where everything is coupled. So you have to refactor WP admin in order to extract things.
So that's interesting. So in the way that I imagine it is really the failure point of WordPress's coupleization is WP settings and WP load. That's where everything just gets pulled in. It doesn't matter what it is. WordPress pulls in the customizer, gravatars, rewrite rules, taxonomies, posts, internationalization. Maybe you don't need get text at all. Maybe you don't need rewrite rules. Maybe it's only a RESTful API endpoint with no UI. Why pull in all that stuff? I think the modularization of WordPress is the allowance for letting all of that stuff not need to exist. But then if you're going to go into /WP admin should pull in all of that stuff because it expects for all of that stuff to be there. So I think of WP admin really as a web app. It is the WordPress UI, and it will always be WordPress's UI. But what we have the opportunity to do is to make everything that happens from hitting index.php on be a completely different experience, a custom crafted experience for whatever it is that you need, and that happens from WP blog header, WP load, and WP settings. It's interesting. I guess I hadn't thought of reinventing WP admin or refactoring that part of it, because that part of it, I think that at the risk of maybe being obtuse, I think WP admin is sort of fucked. I think it is hard-coded to be exactly what it needs to be, and that going in and trying to remake WP admin without starting over is a fool's errand in a way. You're going to run into, especially starting with menus.php, that is the worst code in WordPress. It is the worst example of WordPress code.
I think we just went through, Andreas started it, and then I I picked up his code, and we went through and started extracting pieces out of WP Admin. I know
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who set up sites for clients that want to extract things out of WP Admin. And I almost see that if you're going to modularize posts, for example, you're going to take everything that's in WP Admin that's related to posts, and you're going to modularize it. You're going to pull it over. Doesn't mean that the pages change, other than not displaying things that you don't provide in terms of modules. You know, if you don't have the media module, then the media doesn't show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, one of the things that I would really like to do is modularize the admin more than the external side.
Cool, because I don't want to do any of that shit at all.
I would love.
Have at
I think
love.
modularizing the admin comes after modularizing everything else. I think.
But you have to modularize the admin to extract the post types, for example. Because the register post type doesn't use the labels and stuff to create its own menu. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's fine, but I still think you need to modularize, let's say, register post type before you start modularizing the menu for the admin.
But you need to extract the stuff that is related to the menu, since the menu is hard-coded. So if I noticed this, I removed the register post types for posts. The menu is still there, but if you click it, then it says invalid post type. That's the error message that you get on a WP die screen.
I'm supporting Andreas here. That I mean, you should basically take everything that is about post types, whether it's admin or front end, and you should extract that into one module.
So I don't disagree. I'm just totally not interested in doing any of that stuff myself at all.
I'm happy
that you guys are. I think, and part of me almost considers that just bugs in WordPress. That doesn't really even apply to the cool modularization and abstraction stuff that we're doing for this. That's just a WordPress bug. But like menu.php is a nightmare.
Somebody
the admin area is the
stuff.
Somebody tweet a quote for John, or the WordPress admin is a bug.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but should so you're coupling the menu with the post type creation? Should it be coupled at all?
No.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like the menu.
I think the function register post type is a convenience function of WordPress that lets you pull all of those other decoupled things in. If getText exists, then you can ship it some labels. If WP admin exists, then it actually provides a UI for it. But if these modules aren't included, or for whatever reason they're not in the manifest, or they're not involved in the project that you're working in, then the register post type function would say, okay, well, we don't have getText, so we don't need to translate anything. We don't have an admin area, so we don't need any labels. All we're going to do is register some rewrite rules. Oh, WP rewrite doesn't exist. We can skip that part. What does it do then? Very little, other than globalize a bunch of things that are available and loaded.
I just one thing today. Can you register labels as the menu stuff for a post type on a separate call from the register post type itself, so you can create the menu for the post type outside of the...
You can actually. So the horrible thing about the way that this works is that it's really just a WP post types global. So you could not call register post type, shove whatever you want to into the global variable, and WordPress will not care.
I know that's
about
how
what
it's
done.
done now, but I wondered if there was an official way to do it, so to speak, because I think having the UI itself for various things be a module, and then having, just because you have posts doesn't mean you want to have the menu.
Right.
So separating that would be interesting, because I know that I think Roy mentioned the whole his Angular experience and his removing of the WP folder completely.
Right.
Then you still might want the post types, but then the whole menu system is useless if you don't edit it.
Well, I have a
Right.
question. If you do WP insert post, right? WP insert post takes an array of I think it's WP, whatever. The function to create a new post. It takes an array. One of the things in that array is post type. If you tell it a post type that you didn't actually do a registered post type, will it error out?
No, it shouldn't. It didn't used to. That was sort of the kludge for custom post types before there were functions and wrappers for them. You could theoretically have a custom post type by feeding a post type argument, and it should insert it regardless.
And if I do a WP query with a post type that I didn't do a registered post type, shouldn't it still be able to call the database and get all the items in the database that exist for that post type?
It should, absolutely. If it no longer does, I would consider that a bug. And comments should work the same way. You can theoretically query or save your own comment types without there being like a registered comment type.
Well, so the registered post type function is basically useless.
Here's the counter to that. Not because I believe it should be that way, but because I think it's, using my euphemism of physics, I think it's going to be that way no matter what. Sure, you could have a WP query where you call, where you have a post type, and it'll just go get it, right? But I can't remember whether that 2,500 lines in there ever accesses the post type object to look at anything about the post type. And even if it doesn't, if any plugins that are called on any of the hooks in WP query call any of those features, then that's going to break as well. So the dynamic nature of WordPress to define itself, or to allow people to define itself, kind of makes some of those things. When you say it, you consider it a bug, well, yeah. But I don't think we can have a dynamically controllable language without having those problems.
So I think the ability to query a database for data should not be tightly coupled to whether or not functionality has announced that it exists, right? So whether or not the topic post type is registered, I should still be able to query for the topic post type and get results.
That will take 4 to 5 levels of refactoring to get to the point to where that can be possible.
Well, yeah.
I guess I don't know that the WP query class checks for registered post types. It shouldn't. If it does, I would be a little mind blown. It's worth looking into.
But any plugins that use any of the hooks, or any themes that use any of the hooks, could. So you have that problem.
Oh, well, sure. As far as the dependency side of it, post types should theoretically announce themselves to the environment. But I'm not saying. I'm just saying it shouldn't be a requirement.
We're almost at 2 hours.
What?
We're almost at 2 hours. Do we want to start wrapping up?
Yeah, that's what I was about to do. So. I think there's a lot of conversation, obviously, that we still need to have. But I like the progress we've made. I think, Andreas, I think your notion of trying not to add too much to core is right, but we're not there yet. I think Mike's approach might just be the best approach to getting something that's working as fast as possible. And if we call that version alpha whatever, and immediately refactor it, then that's good. But if we create modules based on what Mike has done and it still works, then I consider that a success as a starting point. So I think the next steps are, Mike, we need to talk about how to get that code into the main repo so people can start contributing. We need to talk about uh, um, no, I think that's about it. Just how people contribute, how to bring your code in, and I guess either in a conversation on Slack or as people want, start tackling modules. And I know that we kind of have a list going on in the main admin repo, that has the vision and some of the other kind of admin stuff. Um, I think post types is a good one to start with. And I think there's obviously a lot of other ones. So um, maybe that's a discussion we have on the Slack channel for anyone who wants to participate. If anyone's listening or sees this, get on the Slack channel and tell us what you're working on, because I don't want 10 people working on post types.
Can I propose a protocol?
Yeah.
Protocol being that in order to modularize anything, that you create an issue on GitHub. Basically saying modularize this, and then say if you're gonna tackle it, you say I'm gonna go start modularizing this.
Yeah, exactly. No,
that way people can first look there to see if somebody else is trying to tackle something.
All right, so let's create tickets and issues for things that you want to work on. Maybe we can talk about a vague list, and maybe the better option is, yeah, you can create your own issue, but maybe I'll create a whole bunch based on a conversation we can have. And then I can just assign people can just comment saying, hey, I'm going to work on this module. That way we have a list. That way if someone doesn't come in and they're like, I don't know what a module is, they can go, okay, cool, I know the user module I need to create, so let me go create the user module, etc. And I'd say I'll just push forward. So I think good starting point, and I think we can be somewhere, come back next week, 2 weeks from now, and hopefully see some modules that are, working and doing some good stuff, and kind of go from there.
Can we, another proposal is that the way that I started it on my repo was to have each issue have a branch, and then, actually, never mind, we're going to do forks.
We talked about this already, yeah. So just so we have because we did a kind of a review at the beginning.
2-hour mark. I'm losing my train of thought.
Yeah. So the last bit is just to review how we're doing it. For those who do want to contribute, create a fork of the main core repo. There's one repo which is actually WordPress core. Create a fork. Your fork will be the module. Once you're done, you'll bring back in, you'll pull request the core repo. So it'll be all of the core repo minus whatever code you took out, and then we'll create what's it called? We'll create another repo in the same organization for your module, which you can push code into. So that way it's all separated. Every module has its own repo, and the core repo kind of basically becomes skinny. We're gonna take code out of it and make it less code. That's the kind of goal. All right. Cool. Anything else from you guys?
Nope.
All right. Thanks for joining. Jacob, thanks for listening. Anyone else who's listening, thanks. And I'll talk to you guys on Slack, and hopefully we'll have another meeting here either in a week or 2 weeks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Good job. Keep on rocking.